In the quiet town of Pinebrook, a routine traffic stop spirals into a night of fear, betrayal, and hidden truths. But when the man in handcuffs turns out to be the town's new police chief, the line between justice and corruption blurs, and the hunt for the enemy within begins. The narrow streets of Pinebrook were cloaked in a soft mist as Ethan Walker steered his blue sedan through the quiet town. The clock on the dashboard glowed 11:27 p.m., late, but not unusual for Ethan, who had just wrapped up a long evening attending a community safety forum. His thoughts drifted to the cozy warmth of his living room and the cup of chamomile tea waiting at home. As he turned onto Oak Ridge Drive, the sudden flash of red and blue lights pierced the night. The wail of a siren followed, cutting through the peaceful silence. Ethan's pulse quickened. He wasn't speeding, and the car's paperwork was pristine. Still, he knew the drill: hands visible, movement slow. "Stay calm," he whispered, pulling over to the curb and lowering the window. Footsteps approached, heavy and purposeful. A flashlight beam slashed through the car's interior, landing on Ethan's hands, then his face. "License and registration," the officer barked. "Of course," Ethan responded evenly. "I'm reaching for my wallet now." The officer didn't acknowledge the statement, only tightened his grip on the flashlight. Ethan retrieved his documents and handed them over. "Mind telling me why I was stopped, officer?" he asked. The cop, name tag Barrett, narrowed his eyes. "Swerving over the line. Suspicious behavior." Ethan frowned but kept his tone respectful. "I don't believe I swerved, sir. I have dashcam footage that—" "Dashcam, huh?" Barrett sneered. "We'll just see about that. Step out of the car." Ethan's stomach knotted, but he obeyed. As soon as he stood, another officer appeared, grabbing his arm and slamming him against the vehicle. "Is this necessary?" Ethan managed, wincing at the pressure on his wrists. "Stop resisting," Barrett snapped, yanking Ethan's arms behind him. The cold bite of metal cuffs locked into place. The mist seemed thicker now as Ethan was shoved into the back seat of the patrol car. Through the window he saw a porch light flicker across the street. A neighbor peeked out but quickly closed their blinds. As the car pulled away, the officers exchanged casual banter, occasionally glancing back with smug amusement. Ethan sat motionless, his jaw clenched. They had no idea who he was, but they would soon find out. The patrol car rattled along the uneven roads of Pinebrook, its headlights slicing through the mist like searching eyes. Ethan Walker sat in the back seat, wrists chafed from the too tight cuffs, his breath measured and calm. Years of experience taught him that panic only fed situations like these. The officers up front chatted as though they'd just wrapped up a mundane traffic stop, not an unjust arrest. "So, Barrett," the younger one said, glancing in the rearview mirror at Ethan, "what do you think? Another late-night delivery boy running errands for the wrong crowd?" Barrett chuckled. "Yeah, probably. Guys like him don't drive around these neighborhoods unless they're up to something." Ethan didn't take the bait. Instead, he looked out the window, watching familiar landmarks blur past. His mind was already at work, cataloging every word, every action. He'd seen this kind of behavior before, just never from this perspective. The car rolled into the station's rear lot. Ethan was escorted inside, his shoulders rigid but his expression calm. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting sterile shadows across the tiled floor. "Right this way, troublemaker," Barrett said, guiding Ethan toward the holding cells. "Am I being charged?" Ethan asked. "Reckless driving, maybe obstruction," Barrett answered with a shrug. "We'll figure it out later." The cell door clanged shut, sealing Ethan in. He sat on the cold metal bench and exhaled slowly. From across the room, the officers leaned against a desk, laughing. "Betcha anything he folds in an hour," Barrett said. "Yeah, or tries the 'I know my rights' speech," the younger officer added. Ethan closed his eyes, suppressing a wave of frustration. He'd dedicated his career to fostering trust between law enforcement and the community. Now he was living the nightmare he'd promised to eliminate. Footsteps echoed down the hall. A woman in her mid-40s appeared, dark hair in a neat bun, expression sharp. Lieutenant Sarah McKinley. Ethan recognized her from the department's internal reports. She glanced at the officers. "Who's this?" "Picked him up for reckless driving," Barrett said. "Seemed shady." McKinley frowned. "Did you review his dash cam?" "We were getting to it," Barrett replied. McKinley's eyes shifted to Ethan. Her brows knit together. "Sir, can you tell me what happened?" Ethan stood and stepped toward the bars. "I was stopped without cause. I have dashcam footage proving I never swerved." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Stay here," she said, turning toward Barrett. "Pull the footage, now." The officers hesitated. "Did I stutter?" McKinley snapped. They scrambled toward the computer terminal. Ethan allowed himself a small, fleeting smile. The tide was shifting. The air in the holding area thickened with tension as Lieutenant Sarah McKinley stood over the computer monitor. Officers Barrett and Green fumbled with the dashcam footage, their confidence from earlier noticeably absent. Ethan Walker remained behind the cell bars, his posture straight, his gaze calm but unyielding. "There it is," Green muttered, clicking on the timestamp from the stop. The video played in crisp detail. Ethan's car driving smoothly along Oak Ridge Drive, centered in the lane, speedometer reading a steady 28 miles per hour. The patrol car followed at a distance before switching on its lights. No swerving, no reckless driving. McKinley's jaw tightened. "Pause it," she ordered. The footage froze on the moment Barrett approached Ethan's car. His body cam audio crackled through the speakers. "Another one of these guys. Let's make it quick," Barrett's voice sneered from the speakers. Green paled. Barrett shifted on his feet. A sharp silence filled the room. McKinley turned slowly toward the two officers. "What exactly was your probable cause for this stop?" Barrett opened his mouth, but words failed him. "Unlock his cell," McKinley ordered. "But Lieutenant—" "Now," she snapped. Green scrambled for the keys and unlocked the door. Ethan stepped out, rubbing his wrists. "Mr. Walker," McKinley said, voice measured. "I'm truly sorry for what happened here. You're free to go." Ethan gave a curt nod. "Thank you, Lieutenant. But I'm afraid this situation isn't over yet." Barrett scoffed. "Oh, yeah? Who the hell are you to say that?" Ethan turned toward him, his calm demeanor unbroken. "My name is Ethan Walker, and I'm the new chief of police for Pine Brook." The room froze. Green's jaw went slack. Barrett's face drained of color. McKinley's eyebrows shot up, but she recovered quickly. "Chief Walker, I didn't recognize you from your file photo." "Understandable," Ethan said. "I've only been here 3 weeks, but I didn't expect my introduction to the department to happen this way." Barrett backed away, hands trembling. "It was just a misunderstanding." "No," Ethan interrupted, voice cutting through the air. "It was profiling. It was abuse of power, and it ends now." He turned to McKinley. "I'd like to call a department-wide meeting tomorrow. Noon sharp. Everyone attends." "Consider it done," she said. Ethan adjusted his cuffs and walked toward the exit. Outside, the first blush of dawn painted the sky in muted pinks and oranges. He paused on the precinct steps, inhaling deeply. The storm had only just begun. The midday sun glared through the precinct's tall windows as officers filed into the briefing room. Conversations buzzed with speculation. Word had spread like wildfire. The man arrested the previous night was the new police chief. The air crackled with tension. Ethan Walker stood at the front, dressed in a crisp navy blue uniform. His nameplate gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Chief E. Walker. He clasped his hands behind his back, eyes sweeping across the room. Familiar faces, curious faces, and 2 pale, anxious ones belonging to Barrett and Green, who sat near the back. Lieutenant McKinley stood to the side, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The clock hit noon. Ethan stepped forward. The room fell silent. "Good afternoon," he began, voice steady but resolute. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm Ethan Walker, your new Chief of Police. I had planned a more traditional introduction, but as you've likely heard, last night changed that. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Last night I was pulled over without cause. I was accused of reckless driving, handcuffed, and thrown into a holding cell. Not because I was breaking the law, but because of how I look. The silence deepened. A few officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Now let me be clear, Ethan continued, his tone sharpening. I've spent over 20 years in law enforcement. I know the challenges of the job. I know the split-second decisions officers make to protect themselves and others. But what happened last night wasn't about safety. It was about bias, prejudice, abuse of power. His gaze locked on Barrett and Green. And it came from within these walls. Barrett dropped his head. Green's face burned crimson. We are here to serve and protect. All people. Not just the ones we feel comfortable with. Not just the ones who look like us. If you can't abide by that principle, then hand in your badge today. The room held its collective breath. Ethan stepped aside and gestured to McKinley. Lieutenant McKinley will outline the immediate changes being implemented. Effective immediately. McKinley nodded, stepping up. Starting today, all officers will undergo comprehensive bias training. Dashcam footage will be reviewed regularly, with random audits conducted by an independent oversight committee. Additionally, officers Barrett and Green are suspended pending an internal investigation. The announcement landed like a grenade. Barrett shot to his feet. This is insane. We were just doing our jobs. No, Ethan interjected, voice ice cold. You were abusing your authority, and now you'll answer for it. Barrett's shoulders sagged. The officers around him shifted away. Dismissed, Ethan said. The officers rose, murmuring among themselves as they exited. McKinley approached Ethan. You think it'll make a difference? She asked. Ethan exhaled slowly. I think it has to. Outside, the sun was brighter than before. But Ethan knew the shadows hadn't disappeared. They'd only been exposed. The days following the meeting sent shockwaves through Pinebrook. Local news outlets caught wind of the incident and ran headlines like, New police chief targeted in racial profiling incident by his own officers. The footage from Ethan Walker's dashcam leaked online, spreading across social media like wildfire. Comments flooded in. Unbelievable. This could have been anyone. Respect to Chief Walker for handling this with such grace. What else has been happening behind closed doors? The town's trust in its police force, already fragile, now balanced on a knife's edge. Ethan sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen. Emails from residents poured in, some offering support, others venting years of accumulated resentment. His phone buzzed with a text from Mayor Collins. Mayor Collins. Ethan, we need a public address. Tonight, 7 p.m. Town Hall. Ethan sighed. He knew it was necessary. The community didn't just need reassurances, they needed accountability. By 6:45 p.m., the town hall was packed. Residents stood along the walls, clutching signs with messages like, Justice for all, and Accountability starts here. Ethan stepped to the podium. The low hum of conversation faded into expectant silence. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and began. Good evening, Pinebrook, he said. I'm here tonight because of an incident that should never have happened. I was profiled, detained, and arrested. Not as Chief Walker, but as a black man driving through his own town. The crowd murmured in agreement. A few heads bowed, others nodded with grim recognition. But this isn't just about me, Ethan continued. It's about a system that allowed 2 officers to act on their biases unchecked. A system that's supposed to serve you, not intimidate you. He scanned the crowd. Rebuilding your trust won't happen overnight, but here's what we're doing right now. He laid out the reforms, mandatory training, community oversight, and a zero-tolerance policy for misconduct. Accountability starts today, Ethan concluded. And it starts with me. Applause erupted, but as Ethan stepped away from the podium, a voice called out, Chief Walker. A teenage boy stood near the back. His hands trembled as he clutched a microphone. "My dad. He was pulled over last month. They said it was for a broken taillight, but he doesn't even have a taillight out." The boy's voice cracked with emotion. "What if what happened to you happens to him?" The crowd stilled, eyes shifting toward Ethan. He walked toward the boy, knelt to his level, and spoke into the mic. "That fear shouldn't exist," Ethan said softly. "And I promise you, we're doing everything we can to make sure it doesn't." Tears glistened in the boy's eyes. Ethan stood and faced the audience once more. "This is why we're here tonight. Change starts now." The applause this time wasn't just loud, it was determined. Later, Ethan sat alone in his office. The town hall was a step forward, but he knew the road ahead would be long. He reached into his desk, pulling out a worn, laminated card. It was a quote from his father, a retired officer who'd fought similar battles decades earlier. "Justice isn't given, it's earned, every day, by every action." Ethan placed the card back into the drawer and stood. The fight wasn't over, it was only just beginning. The following weeks tested Ethan Walker's resolve. Internally, the department reeled from the scandal. Externally, the public grew louder, demanding more transparency, more accountability. The weight of leadership pressed against Ethan's chest like a tightening vice. At 6 a.m. one morning, Ethan sat in his office, the glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he said. Lieutenant McKinley stepped inside, a file tucked under her arm. "Chief," she greeted. Her eyes carried the same unspoken tension Ethan felt. "What is it?" he asked, straightening. She slid the file across the desk. "We finished the internal review of Officers Barrett and Green." Ethan opened it, scanning the dense report. His jaw tightened. Bodycam footage revealed Barrett and Green had conducted over 30 questionable traffic stops in the past 3 months. Most involved residents from minority neighborhoods, with no subsequent arrests or valid infractions. Ethan closed the file. "I want them both terminated immediately," he said, voice hard. McKinley nodded. "Agreed. But there's more." She hesitated, then handed him a small, unmarked envelope. Ethan tore it open. Inside was a single, grainy photo. It showed Ethan's house. A red X was scrawled across the front door. His heart skipped. "Where did this come from?" "Anonymous mailbox drop," McKinley said. "We've upped patrols around your property. Whoever sent this wants you scared." Ethan forced his breathing to steady. "They don't know me very well." McKinley gave a tight smile. "No, Chief, I don't think they do." So that evening, Ethan parked 2 blocks from his home, heart pounding as he surveyed the quiet street. The porch light glowed softly. His wife's car sat in the driveway. Everything looked normal, but normalcy was deceptive. He exited the car, senses heightened. The gravel crunched beneath his shoes as he approached the front steps. His hand reached for the door when, snap, a twig broke behind him. Ethan spun around. In the dim light, a figure darted through the neighbor's yard. "Police! Stop!" Ethan shouted, drawing his off-duty pistol. The figure sprinted toward the woods. Ethan gave chase, adrenaline surging. The pounding footsteps and rapid breaths filled the silence. The suspect reached the tree line, but Ethan was faster. He lunged forward, tackling the man to the ground. "Don't move!" Ethan growled, pressing his knee into the man's back. Okay, the voice gasped. Ethan cuffed the suspect and turned him over. A pale young face stared back at him, no older than 20. "Who sent you?" Ethan demanded. The man shook his head. "I don't know. I was paid to leave the envelope, that's it." "Who paid you?" "I never saw them. Just got a text. $50. I swear." Ethan's stomach twisted. This wasn't random. Someone inside the system was pushing back, hard. He called for backup. As the patrol car arrived, the young man sat slumped in the back seat, head hanging low. Ethan stood on the street, eyes on his quiet home. His family was inside, unaware of the danger that lurked beyond the porch light's glow. This was no longer just about reform. It was war. The next morning, Ethan Walker stood in the operations center, staring at a map of Pinebrook displayed on the large monitor. Red pins marked the locations of the suspicious stops conducted by Barrett and Green. A pattern emerged. Every incident clustered near the city's outskirts, where community trust in law enforcement had long been fragile. Lieutenant McKinley entered, her face grave. "We traced the phone number that contacted the runner," she said, handing Ethan a printout. "It's a burner. Bought at a gas station 2 blocks from our own precinct." Ethan's grip tightened. "So, it's internal." "Looks that way." Ethan leaned against the desk, his mind racing. He'd expected resistance to his reforms, but this was a declaration. The people he was supposed to lead were sabotaging him from the shadows. "We need eyes inside," he said. "Someone who can blend in, gather intel." McKinley hesitated. "I've got a contact in internal affairs. Discreet. Reliable. I'll reach out." "Good," Ethan said. "And tell dispatch I want every officer's body cam footage from the past 6 months reviewed. Quietly." That evening, Ethan arrived home, exhausted but restless. His wife, Lena, met him at the door. "You haven't slept," she said softly. "I can't. Not until I know who's behind this." She squeezed his hand. "You'll figure it out. Just remember why you took this job. Don't let the darkness pull you under." Ethan kissed her forehead. "I won't." But as he lay in bed later, the image of the red X on his door burned behind his eyelids. 3 nights later, McKinley burst into Ethan's office, face pale. "We've got something." She placed a flash drive on his desk. The IA contact found discrepancies in Officer Barrett's radio communications. Ethan plugged it in. Audio files appeared. McKinley clicked on one labeled April 15th, midnight shift. Static crackled. Then Barrett's voice. "Yeah, he's in the cell now. Chief Walker. Told you it'd be easy. What's next?" A low, distorted voice replied, "Leave him overnight. Let him stew. We'll handle the rest." Ethan's pulse spiked. "Play that again," he said. McKinley did. Ethan closed his eyes, dissecting the voice. It was disguised, but familiar. Then it hit him. "Pause it," Ethan ordered. McKinley froze the clip. Ethan grabbed his phone, scrolling through old voicemails until he found the one he sought. Captain Dean Harris, his second in command. He played the voicemail, then gestured for McKinley to replay the distorted clip. The cadence, the subtle rasp. "It's Harris," Ethan whispered. McKinley's eyes widened. "Your captain?" "My captain," Ethan echoed, the betrayal bitter on his tongue. By morning, Ethan had a plan. He summoned Harris to his office. The captain arrived, all false smiles and forced concern. "Heard about the incident at your house, Chief," Harris said. "Need me to look into it?" Ethan forced himself to stay calm. "Actually, yes," he said, sliding the flash drive across the desk. "We found something interesting." Harris's face paled as he recognized the file. His eyes darted toward Ethan's desk drawer, where his service weapon was kept. "Don't," Ethan warned, hand resting casually on the drawer's edge. "It's over, Dean." The facade shattered. Harris lunged toward the door, but McKinley appeared in the hallway, gun raised. "Captain Harris," she said coldly, "you're under arrest for conspiracy and misconduct." As McKinley cuffed Harris, Ethan stood and stared down at the man he once trusted. "Why?" he asked. Harris sneered. "You came in here thinking you could change everything. But this department doesn't belong to you, Walker. It never will." "We'll see about that," Ethan replied. That night, Ethan sat on his porch, watching the streetlights reflect on wet pavement. His phone buzzed. "Lieutenant McKinley. Harris is in custody. Evidence is solid. We've got him." Ethan exhaled deeply. The enemy within had been exposed, but the battle to rebuild trust had only just begun. The news of Captain Dean Harris's arrest spread through Pinebrook like wildfire. Police captain arrested for conspiracy against chief dominated headlines for days. The revelation that a high-ranking officer had orchestrated a campaign to undermine reform sent shockwaves through the community and the department. Inside the precinct, tension crackled like static. Officers who had once exchanged nods of camaraderie now eyed each other with suspicion. Ethan Walker stood at the heart of it, feeling the weight of the task ahead. On Monday morning, he addressed the department again. The briefing room felt heavier than before. He placed his hands on the podium and scanned the faces before him. "Trust," Ethan began, voice low but resonant. "That's the foundation of this uniform. Without it, we're just people with badges and weapons." He let the silence settle. "Last week, a man we trusted, Captain Harris, betrayed that trust. He tried to sabotage the integrity of this department. But make no mistake, he acted alone, and he failed." A few heads nodded. Others remained guarded. "I know some of you are wondering if we can come back from this," Ethan continued. "And the truth is, we can, but it won't be easy. It starts with each of us, being accountable to ourselves, to each other, and to the community we swore to protect." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Effective immediately, we're establishing a community partnership unit. Officers will attend town halls, visit schools, and engage with residents. We're also implementing anonymous reporting channels for the public and within the department. If someone crosses the line, I want to know. And I promise you, no one is above accountability, not even me." The silence was thick. Then Officer Ramirez, a veteran with 2 decades on the force, stood. "I joined this department to make a difference," Ramirez said, voice rough with emotion. "Somewhere along the way we lost that. But I'm in, Chief. Let's fix it." Others murmured in agreement. Ethan gave a small nod. It was a start. That night, Ethan drove to Pine Brook Community Center, where a town hall meeting overflowed into the parking lot. He stepped up to the microphone. "I know many of you feel betrayed," Ethan said. "So do I. But I didn't take this job to maintain the status quo. I took it to change it." Murmurs of skepticism rippled through the crowd. "You've seen the footage. You've seen the arrests. But change isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about building something better. And that starts now." A young woman raised her hand. "How do we know you're not just another badge telling us what we want to hear?" Ethan stepped off the stage and walked toward her, microphone in hand. "Because I was in that cell," he said softly. "Because I know what it feels like to be afraid of the people who are supposed to protect you. And I promise you, as long as I'm chief, no one will feel that way again." The crowd stilled. Then applause began, hesitant at first, then steady, then resounding. A month later, Pine Brook saw its first community patrol walk-through. Ethan walked alongside officers and residents through neighborhoods once wary of police presence. Children waved, parents watched with guarded optimism. As they passed a small brick house, an elderly man on the porch stood and tipped his hat. "Morning, Chief Walker," the man said. "Morning, Mr. Lewis," Ethan replied. Lewis nodded toward his grandson, who clung to his leg. "Told him what you did. He said maybe one day he wants to be an officer too." Ethan smiled, crouching to meet the boy's eyes. "We'd be lucky to have you, buddy." The boy grinned shyly. As Ethan stood and continued walking, he felt the weight of responsibility shift. The fight wasn't over. It never would be. But for the first time since that night on Oak Ridge Drive, he felt hope. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping tales of mystery, justice, and the fight for truth. Join us as we uncover the hidden battles that shape our world.